All right. Section 1.1 is just well, actually, all of chapter one is a lot of terminology, what statistics is, and how they how they can be. Um, well, I'm stuttering already. Um, what can cause the statistics that we encounter every day to be invalid. A lot of times it's just the process that was used in collecting the data or something that was used in processing the data. So we want to get good at setting up or recognizing a study that is well set up so that we can trust the conclusions of that study. So let's just jump in. Statistics is the science of gathering, organizing, and summarizing data. And I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Y'all learn I never sneeze once. I sneeze in multiples of three. Actually, there are two definitions of statistics. One refers to the process that we just described, and it's called a science because, like the scientific method, there are very specific steps that you should follow, and following those steps greatly enhances your chances of coming to some valid conclusions. The other definition of statistics, we use the same word to describe the data that describe or summarize something. So you'll be able to tell when we're using statistics, the word statistics, to refer to a product process, and when we're using statistics just to refer to some data that we have. The population of a statistical study is the complete set of people or things being studied. Often we make inferences about populations by looking at a sample. If you want to know the average, let's say the average weight of an adult male, you can't weigh every adult male in the world. So you take a sample and hope that your sample is representative of the population. Now, the specific characteristic of this population is called the population parameter. So in the example I just mentioned, if we were doing a study on the weight of adult males, then the weight of all adult males is the population parameter that we're studying. And like I said, you can't always get data from the entire population. So we get our data from samples, and samples are subsets. A sample is a subset of the population from which the data is obtained. The actual measurements of observations collected from a sample are referred to the sample. No, I'm sorry. The actual measurements are called the raw data. And then sample statistics are the numbers describing the characteristics of the sample. They're found by consolidating or summarizing the raw data. Now, let me highlight something for you here. Um, you need to understand that when we're trying to study something about a population, we obtain a sample. And the information that we get from the sample is our sample statistics. And we use those sample statistics to make generalizations about the population. Now, what I want to highlight is this: the characteristic of the population being studied, that's parameter. And I'm highlighting this because it turns out handy that population and parameter both start with the same letter. We talk about parameters of a population, and we talk about statistics of a, oops, I highlighted too much there. We talk about statistics. Shoot, I did it again. Maybe I just need to tap it instead of holding it down. Yeah, there we go. Statistics come from a sample. Parameters refer to a population, and it's handy that those start with the same letters. All right, let's do an example. We're given information about a study, and we want to identify the population parameter, the sample, and the sample statistics. So the study is this: the U.S. Labor Department defines the civilian labor force as all those people who are either employed or actively seeking employment. Each month, the Labor Department reports the unemployment rate, which is the percentage of people actively seeking employment within the entire civilian labor force. To determine the unemployment rate, the Labor Department surveys 60,000 households. And so, what is the population being studied here? Somebody unmute and tell me that. What's the whole population the U.S. Labor Department is trying to make inferences about? All right, maybe I'll do this example and then y'all can help me with the next one because it's a little awkward to jump in via Zoom. I think we'll all be more comfortable when we're back in the class, hopefully Wednesday. The population here, the U.S. Labor Department is trying to assess what percent of the entire civilian labor workforce is unemployed. So the population is the civilian workforce, which is all those people who are either employed or actively seeking employment. The U.S. Department of Labor is trying to make a generalization about all of these people. And the population parameter, the thing they're studying is the percentage of people typo actively seeking employment. When the Labor Department publishes the unemployment rate, they're making a generalization about the percent of people in the workforce who are currently looking for a job. Now, I know you can help me with this. What about the sample? What sample do they use to make this prediction about the entire civilian labor force?
Is it the 60,000 households?
Yes, and you get 30,000 bonus points for chiming in with me there. Thank you. The sample is the 60,000 households surveyed. The sample is always some subset of the population. And then what is the sample statistic? It isn't given explicitly here. We don't have a number for what the sample statistic turned out to be for some particular month, but the sample statistic that the department is looking at is the percent of the sample actively seeking employment. So each month, the Labor Department wants to know about what percent of the civilian workforce is looking for work. They can't call everybody in the civilian workforce and ask them, hey, are you looking for a job right now? So they choose a sample. They choose a very large sample, 60,000 households, and they find the percent of the sample that is seeking seeking employment, and they say, well, we've got a good sample. We have a 60,000 person sample. So the percent of the whole population that's seeking in employment is probably pretty close to the percent of the sample that is seeking employment. All right, let's do the same thing on example 2. A study of 106 adult subjects showed that their average, and by average, we've talked about different kinds of things you can call average, but this is referring to the mean body temperature, was 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Identify the population, parameter, sample, and statistic. What do you think the population being studied here is? This is produced by, or based on data provided by Stephen Wasserman, Philip Makowiak, I don't know how to pronounce that, and Myron Levine of the University of Maryland. What do you think they were trying to make an estimation of?
The adult body temperature?
Perfect. All adults' body temperature. So adults all adults would have been their population. And then the thing that they were trying to generalize for all adults was what?
Their temperature.
Yeah. So adult body temperature. And it's important to distinguish that we are talking about adults here. You couldn't make a generalization about adult body temperature if your sample was children, because children may not have the same resting body temperature that adults do. So this study is only addressing adult body temperature. And what is the sample?
A 106 adults.
Yeah, perfect. Now, if they chose that 106 adults, people who were sitting in the emergency room at the local hospital, do you think that the 106 adults sitting in the waiting room at the hospital is likely to have the same temperature as the population? No. Quite likely, a lot of the adults in the ER have a fever, or certainly more adults in the ER would have a fever than just your average adults. So your sample always has to be representative of your population. And then what is the sample statistic in this study? And this time we're actually given the number.
98.2.
Exactly. So the researchers may say something like, we took a sample of 106 adults. We made sure that our sample was representative of the population. We obtained the sample statistic of 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit. So our conclusion is that the average mean adult body temperature in general is about 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And notice I said about 98.2%. You're never going to be positive that it's exactly 98.2%. But that leads us into the next concept, the margin of error and the confidence interval. The margin of error in a statistical study is the amount by which a sample statistic may vary from the population parameter. I'm sure these researchers from the University of Maryland did not publish their results and say, so since the average temperature of our sample was 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit, we are certain that that's the mean temperature of all adults. You have to take into consideration the fact that there is a certain amount of offness, and that amount of offness is your margin of error. Your margin of error depends on things like the variability of the sample from the population. You may not be able to get a sample that's exactly like your population. Any study is going to have some margin of error. And the confidence interval is the range of values which is likely to contain the population parameter. Instead of saying the average temperature of all adults is 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit, the researchers may say, we're 95% confident, and we'll talk about where that 95% comes from later, but we're 95% confident that the average adult temperature is somewhere between 98 and 98.4. Now, if they said the average adult temperature is somewhere between 98 and 98.4, what's the margin of error they're using? How much does that differ from the sample statistic? How much does 98 differ from 98.2?
0.2.
Yeah, the word differ implies subtraction. And if you subtract 98 from 98.2, you get 0.2. That's the margin of error. And you to get the confidence interval, the 98 to 98.4, you just add and subtract the margin of error from to and from the sample statistic. So the lower bound of the confidence interval is the sample statistic minus the margin of error, and the upper bound is the sample statistic plus the margin of error. And in the example I was just using, if the margin of error was 0.2, then the lower bound of your confidence interval would be 98.2 minus 0.2, and the upper bound would be 98.2 plus 0.2. So let's do a couple of examples with confidence intervals. Number 3 says a 95% confidence interval implies that if you repeated the study multiple times, about 95% of the confidence intervals would contain the actual population parameter. So if you drew 95 samples, 95 different samples, if you repeated the study many, many times, then about 95% of the time, the mean would lie within that confidence interval that you've suggested. There's also a 5% chance that the confidence interval does not contain the population parameter. We can also interpret a 95% confidence interval as being 95% confident that the true population parameter lies between the upper bound and the lower bound of the confidence interval. Now, many times in math books, you have to read a sentence several times to really understand what it's saying. I prefer this second interpretation. It's easier to digest. When we say we have a 95% confidence, that means that if we did this study over and over and over, then we're 95% confident that the true population parameter. Now, what are we using to estimate the population parameter? We can't ask everybody in the world, or we can't take the temperature of everybody in the world. So what are we using to estimate the adult body temperature mean?
Is it still the 106 adults?
It's not the sample, it's the sample statistic. It's the 98.2 is the sample statistic. We're using that to estimate the population parameter, and the population parameter is the average temperature of all adults. So we're 95% sure that the true average temperature of all adults is between 98 and 98.4, between the lower bound and the upper bound of the confidence interval. All right. I thought number 3 was an example. Number 3 was just another note under margin of error and confidence interval. Here's our example. In a Pew Research Center poll of 1,501 randomly selected adults in Latin America, 77% said that global warming is already harming people around the world. The margin of error is 2 percentage points. Identify and interpret the confidence interval. Well, what's the population parameter here? What's the thing that the Pew Research Center poll is, or that the Pew Research Center is wanting to make a generalization about? I wish I had one other thing before we got to population parameter. What's the population here?
Random adults in Latin America?
Well, actually, the population is all adults in Latin America. That's what they're wanting to make a general statement about. The 1,501 randomly selected adults is just your what? What would be the word for that? 1,501 people.
Sample?
The population parameter.
Takes us a while to get a hang of all these words. Population of all adults in, I'm just going to abbreviate, Latin America. That's the population. And then when I redo these notes, I will put in these other things that I'm adding. The sample is the 1,500 randomly selected adults. So the population and the sample are both people. The parameter is what the researchers are trying to find out about the people. So what are the researchers trying to find out about the people?
The global warming and whether it's harming people around the world.
Okay, you're hitting very, very, very close to it. It's a percentage. It's the percentage who say global warming is already harming people. So the parameter, population parameter here is a number. The population in the sample are people, and population parameter is something about the people. And the thing that they're trying to get at is the percent of people. Technically, I should say adults. They're not asking kids. Percentage of adults in Latin America, because that's where the entire sample was from. They can't make a generalization about all adults in the world. They can only make a generalization about the people in the sample, or about the people the sample was drawn from, the population, who say, I'm gonna put ... and highlight the global warming is already harming people around the world. It's people who say that. The percent of people who say that is your population parameter. Now, the percentage of people who say that in the sample, we're not given. Yes, actually, we are given that number. What is the percentage of people in the sample who say global warming is a problem already?
77.
And what's the word for that? The characteristic from the sample is called the... We highlighted it right back here. Sample statistic. The 77% is the sample statistic, and we're trying to use that sample statistic to make a generalization about the population parameter. All right. How do you get the confidence interval? If you know that in the sample, 77% said the global warming is already harming people around the world, and the margin of error is 2 percentage points, then how do you get the confidence interval?
Add and subtract 2 from 77.
Perfect. So the confidence interval is 77 minus 2 would be 75%. 77 plus 2 is 79%. The researchers wouldn't say because 77% of our sample said this, then that's the number we're going to hang our hat on for the entire population. They're going to say, we believe that the percent of all Latin people in Latin America who say global warming is already harming people is somewhere between 75% and 79%. And that's exactly what we need to put for the interpretation. The number, or actually the percentage, of all Latin American adults who say that, just to save space here, I'm going to put ... and the ... refers to the same thing that it did when I previously used ... The percentage of all adults in Latin America who say that global warming is already harming people around the world is between 75% and 79%. That's how you interpret a confidence interval. I just realized I don't have a clock, but we're good. It's just 9:05. We have to 9:50. All right, let's do the same thing for another study. Number 2 is gun laws. In a CBS News / New York Times poll of 1,289 adults nationwide, asking whether they favor or oppose teachers and school officials carrying guns in school, 57% were opposed. The margin of error is 4 percentage points. Identify and interpret the confidence interval. What's the sample here? They couldn't ask everybody in the country, do you favor or oppose teachers and school officials carrying guns? So they pulled a sample of what?
They asked 1,289.
Perfect. That, get my pencil to come back on. That is my sample. And it's pulled from nationwide adults. So what's the population? From what population is the sample drawn?
All adults in the U.S.
Perfect. And I appreciate y'all talking. It's so boring when I do all the talking. All adults in the U.S. Now, what is the population parameter? The thing that this poll was trying to generalize.
Is it looking for the number again or just what they're doing? So would it be whether they oppose teachers
Okay.
to carry guns in schools?
Okay.
Or is it the
We need,
57%?
that's a good question. Help me figure this out. What is the 57%?
That's the adults who were opposed
In the what?
nation.
Mm,
In
they
the
found,
in the sample,
ooh, yes. Which makes it the, what do you call that?
that would be the sample statistic.
Beautiful. That's the sample statistic. That sample statistic is the percent who were opposed in the sample. So if we know the percent who opposed in the sample, then our parameter is what?
Mm.
And I'm not asking for a number here. I'm just saying, what is the thing that we're trying to write a report about?
Whether or not they favor or oppose the teachers carrying guns in school.
Okay, I just need to write that in a way that it's a number. Like my sample statistic is 57% were opposed. So my parameter is percent of not just the sample, but the percent of all US adults that oppose. And I'm just going to say ... So when you're identifying a parameter, you don't just want to say whether they favor or oppose, because that's not a number. You need to say the percent. The sample statistic is the percent of the sample who were opposed. So my population parameter is a percent of the population that oppose. And we said the population is all US adults. All right, and you told me that 57% is our sample statistic, and the margin of error is 4 percentage points. So when I write this article, I'm not going to say we found that 57% of all US adults oppose teachers and school officials carrying guns. We didn't find that exactly. That was our sample statistic. But we are going to say that we're pretty confident that the percentage of all adults who oppose this lies between what and what. What two numbers?
53% and 61%.
Great. That's perfect. 57 minus 4 is 53%. And 57 plus 4 is 61%. So our interpretation would be the percentage of all US adults that oppose, and I'm just going to put ... percentage of all adults who oppose teachers and school officials carrying guns in school is between 53% and 61%. If you read a lot of studies, you'll see that the researchers never say the parameter is exactly this. They say, we're 95% sure it's between this and that. All right, the last thing in this section is the statistical process. I mentioned that statistics, one of the definitions of statistics is that it's a science. If you want your research to be published and taken seriously and people be able to rely on it, then there's a process you have to follow. And the first step in that process is to state the goal precisely. You have to say exactly what it is that you're studying, what you're trying to determine. You have to say the population that you want to study and exactly what you'd learn about it or like to learn about it. So in other words, you state the population and the population parameter, the thing it is that you're wanting to estimate. Second tool or second step is choose a representative sample from the population. And in chapter 2, we're going to talk about how to choose a representative sample, how to make sure that your sample accurately reflects the population. Right now, it's just important to know that that's the kind of sample you have to have. If your sample's not representative of the population, then your entire study is flawed. Step 3, collect raw data from the sample. So in the example that we just did, our raw data would be the answer of each person from the sample, the 1,289 adults nationwide. It would be each person's response, whether they favor or oppose, blah, blah, blah. Summarize the data by finding the sample statistics of interest. Whatever we're trying to learn about the population, we need to determine that same thing for the sample. We use our sample statistics to make inferences or we could say generalizations. Either one of those would be fine. We use a sample statistics to make generalizations about the population. And then finally, we draw conclusions. Determine what you learned and whether you achieved your goal. The figure 1.1 just illustrates that process. You start by, number 1, identifying your goals, stating your population, and then you choose your sample, and we'll talk about good ways to choose a sample and bad ways to choose a sample. From that sample, we get our raw data, and we use the raw data to come up with our sample statistic. In the previous example, it was the 57% of the sample was opposed. And once we have our sample statistics, we make inferences or generalizations about the population parameter. And that's the process. So, this is a different study. Again, the Pew Research Center is just an enormous polling organization. People hire the Pew Research Center when they're trying to make a conclusion about a population. The Pew Research Center for People and Press interviewed 1,002 adult Americans and asked them about the reason for a recent increase in sex scandals among elected officials. So the poll's asking, what do you think's causing this uptick in sex scandals among elected officials? And about 57% of the respondents claimed that the increase was due to greater scrutiny by the media, and 19% felt that the increase was due to declining moral standards. Now, that is 76%. I don't know what the other 24% thought, but 57% said, we don't think people are just worse people than they used to be. We just think the news gives it more attention. And then the 19% said, no, we think people have just lost their minds or lost their morals. What's the population of that survey? About whom is the Pew Research Center trying to make a generalization?
All adult Americans.
Perfect. And they can't contact every adult American and say, what do you think the reason is for an increase in sex scandals among elected officials? So what do since they can't contact everybody?
They chose 1,002 adults.
Yeah, they
US.
they pick a sample from the population, and the sample they chose was 1,002 adult Americans. Now, do you think the study would be valid if they ask 1,002 adults all from Tennessee? No, the views of Tennesseans may not be the same as the views of all adults nationwide. Politically and sociologically, we're probably more conservative. We're more likely to say, hey, it's due to declining moral standards, where nationwide, people may feel that it's caused more by increased media coverage of these scandals. So if you want your study to be valid, you have to choose your sample that's representative of all adult Americans. Now, the 57%, that's the sample statistic. And what does it mean? Somebody give me a sentence on that.
Out of the 1,002 adults that they surveyed, only 57% of that sample agreed that
What does agreed mean? What did that 57% actually say?
that it's due to the media.
Yes. Yeah. You said that well. Explain the meaning of the sample statistic of 57%. 57% of the 1,002, let's see, American adults surveyed said increased change that just a tiny bit. Increase in sex scandals is due to greater media scrutiny. I told you this class is almost more of a reading class than a math class. You're not going to have to do very much math. You are going to have to do some writing. You're going to have to write complete sentences to answer a lot of questions. And really, I didn't want to say this the first day, but most statistics questions are word problems. We weren't just given add these two numbers or solve this equation. We were given a paragraph and asked to identify different things in that paragraph, like the population, the sample, what the sample statistics means, and then in the C part, what can we conclude about the percentage of the population that believes the increase is due to greater media scrutiny? Would we, if we were publishing this paper, would we say, well, 57% of our sample did, so 57% of the population does. Researchers never do that. They never hang their hat on a single number. They give a confidence interval. And in the last sentence of the problem, it told us the median, the margin of error was 3 percentage points. So what is likely to be the conclusion of the Pew Research Center? What are they going to put out? Let me start this sentence. Their percentage. Why am I having trouble spelling percentage today? I'm just going to say the percentage of all adults who believe ... And that ... is, I can highlight it, that the increase in political sex scandals is due to greater media scrutiny. I didn't want to copy that whole phrase. But our conclusion could be the percentage of all adults who believe that is between what?
54 and 60%.
Beautiful. You took the margin of error, added it to, and subtracted it from this 57%. So it's between 54% and 60%. All right. This next bullet point still refers to the same study. Identify how researchers applied the 5 basic steps in the survey above, in the above example. What do you think the percent, what do you think the Pew Research Center stated as their goal? What were they trying to determine?
Would it be the reason for recent increase in sex scandals among
That's
elected
good.
officials?
Yeah, the poll was kind of wide open. They just said, what do you think is the cause of this? Or maybe they had some multiple choice. Maybe they came up with 5 things they thought people might say and then had people choose from among the 5. I'm not sure exactly how that was done, but you're exactly right about the goal. It was to find the reason. Actually, it's to find what adults believe to be the reason. May or may not actually be the reason, but it's what adults believe the reason is for the recent increase in sex scandals. It really didn't say how they chose their sample. It told us what the sample is, the 1,002 adult Americans. We're going to assume, but if this was done by a legitimate organization like the Pew Research Center, they randomly selected 1,002 adult Americans. And again, they wouldn't want them all from the same part of the country. They wouldn't want them all the same gender because men might believe something different than women. They would want a random selection that's representative of the population of all adult Americans. Step 3, collect raw data. What would that raw data be?
Would
It
that
would be
what they believed, whether it was the scrutiny of media or the declining moral standards?
Or since that only adds up to, what did I say, 76%, it could be some other reasons as well. It's not just limited to those two reasons, but it's answers. I'm just, to keep this short, I'm going to say answers of or from, answers from the sample. And the sample statistic would be, let's see the best way to word this, the percent of answers in each category. And we're only given the two categories. Hey, it's due to the media, or hey, it's due to the declining moral standards. But again, since that only adds up to 76%, there obviously were some other categories. Those are probably the two categories in which most of the sample responded. How did they use sample statistics to make inferences about the population? I don't know what to write there. I just want to say, yes, they did. They did use the sample statistics and I'm going to say the sample statistics is the 57% who believed ... to estimate the percent of all adults who believe ... They use the sample statistic to generalize the what's the word for the thing being studied about the whole population? Your statistic comes from the sample. What comes from the population? It also starts with a P.
Population parameter.
Perfect. Do we have that highlighted somewhere? Because it's the most important sentence of this whole section. It's really the step 4, use sample statistics to make inferences or generalizations about the population, if I added the word parameter to that sentence, that's the goal of statistics. To use sample statistics to make inferences about the population parameter. And so the researchers' conclusions. Based on the sample statistics that we have, and obviously there are some sample statistics that we don't have for 24% of the respondents, but for the sample statistics that we do have and the margin of error that's reported, I'm looking for two sentences that might sum up the results of this whole survey. Can you give me one of them? I think it's easier to write it than to think it and say it out loud. When I'm writing, I can erase if I have to. I'm going to use some dots here, but the percentage. Ooh, I have something I can sum this up with. The percentage who blame media. How about that? Is between what and what?
The 54 and 60%.
Mm-hmm. It's what we answered in the C part. Between 54% and 60%. We could also take the other sample statistic that we were given and say the percentage who blame morals. Technically, who believe declining moral standards, but we're just going to say the percentage who blame morals is between what?
$16 and 22%.
Mm-hmm. That is 3% added to and subtracted from the 19%. So 16% and 22%. That's still kind of a technically worded conclusion. That's probably not what the final sentence in the study would be or in the conclusions would be. The fact that the percent who blame the media is between 54% and 60%, the published conclusion would probably be what's that word for more than half? Starts with an M.
Majority.
MA. Yeah. The conclusion's probably the majority of all adults blame the media. Or whether the percent who blame the media is 54% or 60% or some number between 54 and 60%, all of those numbers would still be in the majority, more than 50%. So that's probably what the conclusion would be. The majority of all adults blame increased media scrutiny for the recent increase in sex scandals. All right. Do you have questions about anything we've talked about? Do I still have? Yep, bless your heart. Y'all need some bonus points. Only 3 people joined us. It's possible somebody else had a power outage. That's entirely possible. But if you can't, oops, what just happened? Oop. I can't go full screen or y'all disappear. If you, one more time, does anybody have any questions from any of the terminology that we covered today? All right. Hop on there and do the homework. It's available. Well, I think I have it set to come on 10, but since we're through, I'll go ahead and make it available right now. And if you have any questions, you just let me know, okay? I hope to see y'all in person Wednesday. Bye-bye.